While you were chasing Bill, I was tapping the real RB1 in Washington. Oh, you drafted Dante Thornton with your last pick? Cool. I got the actual starting receiver for the Raiders. Look, those are some of the things you might hear from the champion of your fantasy league. And let me tell you what they're talking about. There's certain players that aren't even being drafted here. There's a lot of guys getting more hype and more attention. Doesn't mean they're the guys that you should be on your squad. So let me tell you about some of the top must stash players before the season even starts. So now word is starting to get around. Everyone's been hyping up Ja'Cory Crosskey Merritt. And look, I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. The guy could still break out, right? We're not just pulling 180 here and saying, yeah, it was a complete waste of time. It just got out of hand. It always happens. There's always somebody every season where the hype is too much. So sure, stash him, keep him on your bench. Again, your bench. But as of right now, what we're hearing, it's not a surprise. It's Chris Rodriguez Jr., who's going to be the number one, at the very least the 1A to start the season. And hey, it might just stick throughout the rest of the season if he performs. You don't believe me? Okay, so here's a couple things. First of all, Dan Quinn, the head coach of Washington, was just recently asked, is Chris Rodriguez the goal line back and short yardage back? His answer was yes. There was more to it after that, but I don't think that really matters. Again, the question was, now that Brian Robinson has been traded, who's getting the touchdowns, the goal line work? Is it Chris Rodriguez? It is. He confirmed it, all right? Not JCM or BCM. And this was confirmed by Adam Kilgore of the Washington Post. He's one of the Commanders' beat reporters who's very dialed in here. And he said, yeah, he's going to be the guy to start the season, to get those touchdowns when they're in the red zone. Isn't that the guy you want for fantasy? Now you think, okay, well, Rodriguez has been there, right? Well, he hasn't done much before. Why would he all of a sudden be the guy? Well, in part because he has been there and he knows the system and they know him and all that. And they know that they feel confident in him. And so that to me is a good thing, the familiarity. But the other thing, and I know we've heard this before, but still, during the offseason, he really worked on things. He slimmed down, some sort of a hardcore training program. He worked on his ball handling, but also his pass catching and his hands out of the backfield. If he adds that element to his game, then that could be a game changer. Now, Austin Eckler is still there. Yes, Austin Eckler's the third down back, right? That's for sure. But if Rodriguez gets the occasional reception, that is just going to really amplify what he's already bringing with touchdown upside. And that's what we're looking for. Because let's face it, Brian Robinson Jr. was okay at times. I mean, I know it feels like he was just a big bum now that they traded him. He was serviceable in fantasy, right, for the last 2 seasons. And a lot of that was because he was the short yardage and goal line back in a good offense. And look, Rodriguez had very, very small sample size here. There's not like he got a lot of opportunities to showcase himself, but when he did, he was actually pretty efficient. In fact, Jared Smola pointed out the fact that of all running backs with at least 30 carries last season, 5th in yards after contact per attempt, 2nd in elusiveness rating, and 7th in rushing grade, according to PFF. Ultimately, I think this is going to be a committee at some point. Maybe a guy will pull away, but look, right here, right now, Chris Rodriguez is going to be the 1A in the Commanders offense. That's the guy you want. Don't drop Bill, but don't ignore Chris Rodriguez. And if you want to get him before week 1, when he potentially does get in the end zone and everybody else is rushing up, pick him up, I do it. Now, quite a few fantasy managers have already run out to pick up Ollie Gordon because as it stands, he's the RB2 in Miami. And Devon Achane still battling that calf injury. Now, I know we've said over and over again, not worried about it. Achane's already back at practice. He'll be there week 1. Ollie Gordon's not starting for Miami. But he's the backup because Jalen Wright is not going to be out there. And when asked, Mike McDaniel said he'll be back sometime in September. We're going to see Ollie Gordon as a primary backup at least a week or 2, maybe 3 or 4. Who knows? Let's also recall the fact Jalen Wright, not very good in the preseason, not efficient whatsoever in the touches he did get. Ollie Gordon was. Among all running backs in the preseason, he wound up 9th in fantasy points, but also 5th in rushing yardage among all running backs. Now, of course, you always have to take that with a big, huge, fat grain of salt because if you look at the list, most of these guys don't even wind up making the squad. A lot of these guys you probably have not even heard of. You don't remember Bam Knight? Well, that's different because Ollie Gordon is on the squad. He made it. He's the backup. The opportunity is there. See Chris Rodriguez Jr. there too. Now, Ollie has a lot of things working against him here. Like this is the reason he fell and has been an afterthought. He was a late round pick. I mean, 6th round. Running backs usually don't cut it. That's because he fell off in his final season at college. You know, a guy who you expect might get better, improve his draft stock. He fell off tremendously his final season. And his workout metrics don't exactly scream, I'm a stud NFL running back. In fact, looks like he's barely even replacement level. So yeah, on paper, he shouldn't be on the squad, but he is because he's performed. And we did have that 2023 college season where he looked like a stud. I mean, maybe this is, yes, I hate to say it, same comp again, but Chuba Hubbard 2.0. But let's give it a shot. You know that the Dolphins want to try to establish the run again like they did a couple years ago when they had Raheem Mostert. Remember that he led the NFL in touchdowns that year? Yeah, exactly. Guy who's like already 30 years old, Raheem Mostert. Gordon is not as fast as him, but he's in the same system. He's a little bit better at breaking tackles. And it doesn't hurt that while Jalen Wright is out and Gordon is the RB2, remember, behind a running back who is pretty smallish and has had some injuries his first couple of seasons and is battling a calf issue. And the Dolphins just so happen to have, in the first 3 games, positive matchups against defenses as far as the running back is concerned. According to Fantasy Pros, they get the 6th best strength of schedule overall in the season. Is Ollie Gordon going to be valuable all season long? Maybe, maybe not. But look, let's live in the here and the now. Take a chance, see what happens. All right, speaking of here and now, week 1, look, I don't just want to stash Cedric Tillman. I'm starting Cedric Tillman in a lot of teams if I can flex him. And yeah, that's because they play the Bengals defense, and we know the Bengals and the word defense, those two things don't really jive these days. And this is a great matchup for him. Joe Flacco is going to be out there slinging it. We already talked up this matchup quite a bit, but it's easy to forget about Tillman. You got Jerry Jeudy. Yeah, everyone knows him. David Njoku said he's going to go off. I think he will. But what about Cedric Tillman? He's the number 2 receiver there in this offense, and he's going to get targeted plenty too. If you watched the preseason videos, the draft videos we've been putting out, you've heard this before, but maybe you didn't. Cedric Tillman, remember, was really just not even a factor in this offense at all until Amari Cooper got traded out of Cleveland, got inserted in the starting lineup, and all of a sudden, like, the switch got flipped on, and all of a sudden Cedric Tillman was shining. There was a 4-game stretch where he averaged 6 receptions, 76 yards, and a touchdown per game. And then, unfortunately, concussion happened, and that concussion we thought might keep him out a week or 2, and it lingered, and he didn't come back at all. So we don't get to know what might have been through the end of the season. And that's why everybody forgets Tillman. The beginning and the end of last season were completely forgettable because he did absolutely nothing. But we had that month sample size. Not 1 game, not even 2 games, right? Those of you old enough to remember Travis Fulgham for the Eagles, that one glorious month, you might think, is that what this is? You know what? Sure, it could be. I don't think so. It's a talented receiver, has an opportunity now, and it's an offense. Look, whether you consider it a good offense is up to you, but I think this is definitely going to be an offense that passes a lot out of necessity and also has a pretty cush schedule to start the season. In fact, for the first 5 games of the season, based on their defensive matchups for receivers, 4th easiest. All right, another receiver besides Tillman that I know I personally drafted in several leagues. I think Chris drafted him in even more leagues than I did. And gotta buy into Xavier Legette in Carolina. You know, we've been buying into that Carolina offense in general. This whole draft season, I think you gotta buy more specifically into him now because I was big on Jalen Coker. I'm still big on Jalen Coker. Jalen Coker's not out there. He's not gonna be out there for a few weeks because he sadly is on IR with a quad injury, and they called it a severe quad strain, so it might even be more than the minimum of 4 weeks. So you know what that means? More targets for Legette. Now, if you dive into Legette's reception perception, which I personally did, recommend you do the same. Matt Harmon knows his stuff. So Legette's, it's not going to make you feel warm and fuzzy about him. There's some red there, especially on anything that's deep, that 9 and those posts, and you know, just not looking that great on anything that's not some of those short crossing routes. He has to be as Matt points out they're going to be a guy that has to fit in the offense a certain way. They have to know how to utilize him. And last year, once Deontay Johnson was exiled from Carolina and they tried to put Leggett in kind of that X role, which physically you'd feel like he should be able to handle, but just not his forte. But they got a true X with Ted McMillan, and now he can slide back to that flanker role, and that's going to be a good thing because that's where he belongs. They're going to try to get him on the type of routes where he can win, get some more pre-snap movement. You know what? Think of this as sort of a Debo light, right? You hate to make the comment, oh, he's like the next Debo Samuel. That's kind of what he could be, and Dave Canales, I think, is going to play to his strengths because he's a good coach. And the reason I'm talking about Leggett now before week 1 is because, well, obviously right now Coker's hurt. The beginning of the season is the time he's going to see his greatest opportunity, but also they play Jacksonville, right? They could put up a ton of points right away, and the schedule is also pretty easy the first month of the season for Carolina. Got more players that you want to stash, but first, I'm going to let you know that if you have questions about who to pick up on waiver wire, who to start, who to sit, that's what Draft Lane is for. Been talking up the draft feature. You can host fantasy leagues in there, but also it's your source all season long for start, sit, trade, waiver wire questions, whatever you got. Use the Draft Lane app. It's a free download, App Store, Play Store, and if you create an account right now, well, for a limited time, you use code ENDGAME in the promo section, you get $10 of free credit to use. All right, let's fit another rookie in here. You know, the Titans pulled a fast one on us. We thought that we were going to get boring old veteran Van Jefferson starting opposite Calvin Ridley, but no, right before week 1 begins, they announced it was going to be rookie Alec Ayomanor. True story here, right after the NFL draft, and, you know, Ayomanor landed here in Tennessee with, yes, my boy Cam Ward. I was excited. I was like, okay, Chris, at some point I have to do a video just on him as a sleeper, as a breakout rookie, right? Something like this. And he's like, sure, go for it. And then I thought, okay, I'm buying the hype a little too much here. I know I love Cam Ward, but I can't just say some 4th round rookie just because I like him that all of a sudden he's fantasy relevant. Might be a little bit too far, right? They've got other rookies there they drafted even earlier than him at wide receiver, like Chimere DK, and you know, maybe he's just going to go to Ridley, and everybody else is going to be fringe, you know, at best as far as fantasy. We don't know what's going to happen. All right, so like, okay, let's just settle down here. But now I'm back in because he's starting, and you know what? They did this for a reason. He obviously earned this. He's been getting praised throughout camp. All right, fine. A lot of guys get praised at camp, but for a rookie, you know, and for a guy that really is built to potentially be their X receiver of the present and the future, yeah, I'm pretty excited. He was a 4th round pick, and he slid. Reportedly, there might have been a knee issue that concerned some teams. Doesn't seem to be bothering him right now. Look, there's also the fact that he took a step back, you know, in his last year in college, kind of like with Alec Gordon. Not that big of a step, but still, instead of getting better, the numbers declined. But you cannot hold that against him. Just look at the team he was on. Remember, he came out of Stanford. It's a Stanford team that went 3-9 last year, and their starting quarterback, at least their main one for most of the season, Ashton Daniels, he threw 10 touchdowns and 12 interceptions on the season. They finished 109th among Division I schools in points per game. It was a bad offense, but Ayomanor was the guy who led the way, if there was a way for them in the passing game. That's why he had a huge target share, and I mean, he could have been so much better if he was on a remotely decent squad. So I know expectations are low. Cam Ward's a rookie. Titans were bad last year. I believe in Cam Ward, not just because I bleed green and orange, but because I really think he has the makeup to be a franchise quarterback right away. And look, Ayomanor has the makeup to be one of his lead receivers now from the jump. I know it's going to take some time, but man, if you're in a deep enough league, it doesn't have to be dynasty. You could afford maybe to stash him before he has a big game. Now, I promise you the Raiders starting receiver, I'm actually referring to a guy that absolutely nobody's talking about, Trey Tucker. Yeah, Dante Thornton's getting the hype. You know, after the draft, Jack Besh was getting some hype. But Trey Tucker's the guy who's earned that job, and he's actually been the one the coaches have been talking of the most, but nobody seems to care. Now, I understand why, because he's done nothing his first 2 seasons, has not been fantasy relevant other than occasional big play, but maybe this is the season because new coaching staff, new quarterback, most importantly, and now actually even greater opportunity Interesting stat here that I got courtesy of Ryan Kirksey from Fantasy Six Pack. Of 39 wide receivers that had at least 1,000 air yards, only Xavier Legette had fewer actual yards. Just over 1,000 air yards for Trey Tucker last year, and yet he barely came away with over 500 actual yards. So these unrealized air yards, that's typically on the quarterback. All right, so maybe Geno Smith isn't an elite quarterback, a franchise guy. He's a lot better than what he had to deal with last year. I don't think Trey Tucker will get peppered with targets, and I don't expect Jacoby Myers to get traded. But if Jacoby Myers does get traded, something happens there, yeah, Tucker is all of a sudden going to become very interesting on the waiver wire, but he might not need that to happen. All right, let's throw a tight end into the mix. You know, guy I've been talking up here and there throughout the draft process has been Brenton Strange for Jacksonville. Could he be the next Evan Engram? I think so. Evan Engram is gone. The only thing they got behind Brenton Strange at tight end are cast-offs from other teams like Johnny Munt, who was released by Minnesota, and Hunter Long, who was let go by the Rams. Now you might say, well, what about the receivers? You know, tight ends thrive when the receiver depth isn't there. They just got Travis Hunter. They got a stud in BTJ. This is true. But after those two receivers, really, I don't think there's a whole lot to threaten Strange at least getting a pretty healthy target share. I mean, Dyami Brown, we'll see. I mean, he's a guy who's definitely going to be a vertical threat. You know, he's a guy that is going to be involved, but I don't think he's a threat to the type of targets that Brenton Strange is going to get across the middle of the field. Parker Washington, it looks like at this point that he's just depth. He's more of a special teams guy, a backup slot receiver. Not worried about him. And they just acquired Tim Patrick from Detroit, which tells you what they thought about the rest of their depth at wide receiver. This is an offense that has always gone to the tight end frequently. Now I know this is a different coaching staff. We don't have Doug Peterson, right? Mr. Passes to the tight end first and foremost, still there. I understand that, but Strange is still going to be involved in Liam Cohen's offense. Remember, it was under Cohen that Cade Otton had his best season. We got a limited sample here, but in games where Evan Engram didn't play in Jacksonville, where he was hurt last season, Strange was at least adequately involved, 3.6 receptions per game, average about 5 targets. Thinking this is just spot duty, filling in here and there. Some of these games he was technically the starter, but didn't even really play a full complement of snaps. They know going into the season, he's their man at that position. He's going to be involved, and look, I'm not buying into the Trevor Lawrence is somehow all of a sudden better hype just because they got a new coach. But supposedly he's worked on his footwork. He's going to be more accurate. If Trevor Lawrence just makes even modest improvements, that helps everybody in this passing game. And then finally, I actually do want to talk about another Brown, Keyshawn Judkins. Is it worth stashing a guy who not only hasn't played at all in the preseason, hasn't signed for the Browns, hasn't done anything, and still might face a suspension? Are we stashing him? Well, unfortunately, as we're just days away from the start of the season, we got no idea. We have no idea. We know nothing. Cleveland, just going to take us by surprise as they usually do. I'll just say this. If you do have a spot that you don't feel you need for somebody else on your bench, there's not a significantly better player available, I'm okay stashing him. I hate to say he's a must stash because, again, I have very little optimism that he's going to be fantasy relevant anytime soon. This guy has no training camp behind him, and sure, Cleveland needs a running back. They could use him, and yeah, this guy, we were all excited about him after the NFL draft, but a guy who's a rookie on a, let's face it, pretty bad team doesn't just always just step in and produce. Ollie Gordon, Bill Krosky-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez, those guys, there's just not a lot of running backs who could step in and be the starter floating around on the waiver wire. So, on that account, I would just say he's got to be at least considered a good stash candidate, but don't be afraid to pull the plug and let him go if, things take a turn south. Don't wait for your league mates to grab those players after week 1. Stash them now. You'll be thankful later. Grab whoever you feel is the most valuable to your team. You got questions? Again, that's what Draft Lane is for. Ask us there. Join us on the live streams. And you still got tough decisions on who to start and sit in week 1. Everything you need to know is on this playlist.